Where should the leadership for innovation come from to help us to emerge from this crisis? Clients are seeing innovation initiatives being paused. There is this survival mode that everyone is going into. In those of your clients who you gave use cases for, where is their leadership coming from? Is it coming from those in innovation roles of the type that we have representing their firms here today? Or is it coming from the C-suite who've already bought into innovation? Is there a skunkworks equivalent to restart? If you're pausing innovation and telling everyone to concentrate on the core business, but no one is focusing on new business and new ways of working, then how do we grow? There is this fossilization that seems to be happening at the moment. How do people help their firms to get out of this place?
Yes, it's a spectrum, to be honest, Rupert. And it also depends on how senior and respected the role of innovation is within a company. So what we all probably feel like is we're on an innovation maturity journey. So some companies have senior innovation leaders who can help guide other C-suite members at these times of crises. And I definitely would say that the organizations that have that in place, the ones that I'm seeing responding most effectively and efficiently to this process, and the ones that are where, let's say, innovation as a competency is more a newer thing, or it's a lower level activity, it's being dominated by the C-suite, who are pushing primarily towards, efficiency measures and cutting costs. We're seeing organizations looking for short tactical opportunities to save money because they know that the revenues are simply not going to come in as they expected, to Kate's point around the sort of regular KPIs. And often when crisis occurs, C-suite pick a KPI that they think is most critical, be that profitability or be that revenue, whatever it is, and they say, right, let's do everything around that KPI and try and get at least one of these to fly this year. So it depends on, as I said, the maturity of the organization, the seniority of innovation leaders, and of course their individual circumstances. I think that I'll pause and let's see if John has any comments on that, because I got some other thoughts, but I don't want to dominate too much. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that there's inevitably this kind of creative tension between, if I can use that word, the entrepreneurial, challenging, provoking, the stuff that might happen that might move the organization in very different directions, and the stability, the control, whatever, and that tension. If it's balanced, is very, very powerful. What tends to happen, of course, is a lot of the control is from the top, and a lot of the innovation, the experimentation, the challenging takes place at the periphery, lower down. It's a sort of on the ground thing. Finding ways to bridge across those two is a question. If I give an example from the humanitarian sector, this is a big issue for them. As a sector, it's dominated by large, very conservative bodies. It's a very risk-averse sector, despite the world it operates in. And it's risk-averse for some very good reasons. It's mostly using other people's money. It's handling donations, so it has a sense of stewardship. It's very driven by ethics. It's hugely worried about the impact on things. So you really need to have a strong evidence base to change anything. And that builds a sense of stability and trust. And that trust is hugely important. If you look at the desperate things with Oxfam and so on, with the sex issues and so on, that challenges the whole principle on which the organization exists. So trust is important, and it's maintained through this careful, considered, evidence-based approach to change. At the same time, as I implied, it's a sector which needs entrepreneurship, which needs experimentation. This tends to go on in the field, and it's evolved into a kind of dynamic tension. Yes, there's almost an encouragement of things at the field level, this suspension of the normal rules, this permission to play, to try stuff out. But it doesn't necessarily change the whole thing straight away. If you come up with a bright idea, you've got to build the evidence base, and you've got to show that there is something in this new idea that can still be absorbed by the mainstream stewards, if you like. This is good because it's a balanced tension, but it may bring a lot of delay. And one of the fascinating stories, we used to give food aid. Food aid is a hugely important thing in crises. We used to give food aid quite literally by giving food. We'd ship our surpluses and distribute it to where it was needed. Then we got smart and realized we didn't have surpluses, but we could buy food locally near the markets where the crisis took place and distribute it. 1985, a field agent working in Somalia for UNICEF was in trouble. He couldn't take food to people because the bandits kept stealing it. So in desperation, he said to his field chief, "Boss, it sounds crazy, but I'd like to try an experiment. What if we just give people money and let them sort out the problem? They'll somehow be creative. They'll find their way to the market. Let's give them money." And I loved the response of his field boss, a classic innovation sponsor. It was kind of Lord Nelson. "I didn't hear you say that, but actually, yes, go ahead, try it. Let's see what happens." It worked. People didn't go off and have a party. They used the money to find the food that they desperately needed. So there's an experiment on the ground. That sort of pilot was mirrored in many, many different locations. It spread on the ground level across many of the aid agencies. The mainstream, still the dominant model. It actually took 20 plus years for that to really become mainstream, and it was kicked into mainstream by the awful tsunami. The terrible tsunami we had in Southeast Asia didn't really damage places immediately behind the shoreline, so it was a perfect for this new model. Let's give people money, they can go out and find the resources they need for themselves and solve their own problems. Now, food aid is very much distributed in the form of different methods of giving cash, and people will solve their problems. This notion of cash programming, but it didn't happen overnight. And in a sense, there's a question: how do we accelerate the changes within this dynamically tense pair of worlds? Sorry, it's a long response, but I think it's a very important question.